Welcome to Endo Battery, where we are sharing our endometriosis journey and learning along the way. This podcast is in no way meant to diagnose or give medical advice, but a place where you can gain knowledge and information that can help you to not feel alone as well as become your best advocate. We want to learn with you and support you wherever you are in your journey.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Shelby.
And I'm Alana, and we're Endo Battery,
charging our life when endo drains us. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Endo Battery. We are so excited today to have Keara Newton, who is a licensed social worker who works in large community hospitals advocating for patients to get the right care. And we're so excited to have her on and kind of go through what her work looks like in the hospital community.
Keara, can you tell us a little bit about your story and about you?
My life is kind of intertwined with endometriosis and working in the field of social work. I was initially diagnosed with endometriosis when I was a freshman in college. I was lucky / blessed that I didn't have the most common 10-year span of waiting for a diagnosis. My OBGYN at the time was pretty, she brought it up right off the bat. Went through multiple ablation surgeries and multiple partial excision surgeries. Went on, was able to finish college because of an excision surgery. I had a wonderful partial excision surgery that allowed me to continue my college education and graduate school education. Realized very quickly that I wanted to help others. And so I entered into the world of social work and focused on medical social work because I saw how challenging it is to be in the hospital as a patient or be a patient in the healthcare world, how difficult it is to navigate it unless you know the terminology or just the culture of medicine. And so that's why I chose to go into it. Like you said, I work in a large community hospital and work with patients and their loved ones navigating their hospital stay, making sure they get the right care at the right time and in the right place. I primarily work with individuals that have experienced a stroke. And I also work with moms and new babies and have learned a lot. And then on the side, in my free time, I lead a support group for women with endometriosis through the Endometriosis Research Center called the Endo Center of Chicagoland. And then I also am an administrator for Nancy's Nook on Facebook.
I think that's interesting because your story sounds similar in mine, that I was diagnosed fairly early on, but it was the treatment that followed that created a lot of the, I don't want to say trauma.
Yeah.
It is trauma, right? Because you have all these unrealistic expectations of what you're going to feel or what you're going to walk through. And at the end of the day, it doesn't always work. And so I feel like that resonates with me because I didn't associate my story as being overly trauma filled, overly complicated. And yet I look back at it and I'm like, actually, it was way more complicated than I thought. And it did affect me in a lot of different ways moving forward because I had a lot of false hope in the system, a lot of false hope in the outcomes of my ablation surgeries and a lot of that. And so that sounds like it's very similar. Even though we were diagnosed early, doesn't mean the treatment came early.
No, I felt like you hit the nail on the head in the sense that the trauma was more so associated with the treatment and also the sense of trust that we had with our practitioners at the time. You know, I really thought very highly of my OBGYN at the time and started on a drug called Cineral, which was very similar to Lupron. And each time we did the Cineral or we did birth control pills or I had an ablation surgery, I was assured that this would make a difference. And very quickly I realized it didn't. So you lose a lot of hope, like you mentioned.
Mhm. And I think the thing that I didn't really have was like the quintessential what they say gaslighting. Can you define gaslighting? Just because I think that it gets used a lot, but I think it takes a clear understanding of what that is for us to really address it.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I didn't even know what gaslighting was. And I started hearing people talk about it left and right in the endometriosis community. And thank God for Google. And it's really about manipulating someone so that they question
Mhm.
your own reality, your own experiences and beliefs, that you create, that the person that's gaslighting you is creating this sense of self doubt and confusion, making you really question, like, did I really experience this? Am I really feeling this? Um, so it can really leave
Mhm.
a lasting impact.
Yeah, I feel like that doesn't happen just with
No,
doctors though. I think we were talking about this. We have a support group here and I feel like it happens across the board with friends and family and coworkers and even in the hospital system who they should be more knowledgeable about this sometimes. You think they should be, but the reality is that a lot of people in even the medical industry do the same thing. So I don't think this is just for
no,
doctors.
no.
Mhm.
I mean, and as we're sitting here talking about this, I can think of a situation with my father. And I think for men, it's really hard to understand because their bodies don't do the same thing that ours do. And it's has to be very difficult as a parent to see your child suffering and in pain and not being able to do anything. It's so, um, makes you feel so powerless. And as parents,
Mhm,
I think we get that more so now than I did 15, 20 years ago.
mhm.
Um, but I remember my dad not quite understanding it and like, oh, just,
Right.
pick yourself up. You got this. You can do this. We were not a, we were, we never
Mhm,
missed school. We never missed mass every Sunday. That was very important for our family, unless you were truly like on your
mhm,
deathbed, like truly very, very sick.
mhm,
And I think, I remember distinctly the moment that my dad actually understood endometriosis and how much it impacted me was when that surgeon in college
mhm.
did my surgery. And I know this kind of sounds silly, but he wrote on his scrub pants, like my parents' names, I remember, and took the pictures from the laparoscopy and described and showed everything to my dad. And I remember my dad just being like, wow, this is what you were experiencing.
Mm,
Um, so looking back, I can think of that as like my first
mhm.
big memory of gaslighting, but I think there's a lot of negative connotation with gaslighting appropriately. So, but I think there was no, I think sometimes a lot of it's
Mhm.
done because they don't understand. We talk about endometriosis being invisible.
Right.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's what I was just gonna say is, endometriosis is super hard because it's such an invisible
Mhm,
illness that, you can't see, and I always joke with our pelvic floor PT, like, after my surgery, I wish I could wear a shirt that says, "I just had excision," and wear, like, a brace around my midsection because, when people have ACL or ankle surgery, that's visible. People can see that
mhm.
the brace or the cast, and it's not this invisible illness. And so that's what's so tricky with endometriosis is that, until you get those lap pictures back, it's hard to see and understand fully the ramifications that it has caused in your body.
Yeah. How do you address that though? What are some ways that you have kind of counseled maybe some patients or even have worked through yourself of how to address those things? It's specifically, I would say, with family, but also with your healthcare providers because it's so damaging to walk in and feel that way already, feel like something is off, feel like what you're feeling maybe it's
Mhm.
not real, especially if you don't have diagnosis. I think this is even more so that way when you don't have a diagnosis. You already feel like
Mhm.
you're a little crazy, to be honest,
Mhm.
because you don't know what's going on. No one will give you an answer. They think you're crazy. So
I
how
think
do we address
it's
this?
twofold. I think with our own personal experiences with our family and loved ones and friends, I think it's important to try to give people the benefit of the doubt. And when I say that, they're doing the best with the knowledge that they do
Mhm.
have, um, and that it's hard to be on the
Mhm.
outside to understand what you are feeling internally and the amount of pain and discomfort that you're experiencing. Um, I think I'm a huge proponent of counseling. I
Mhm.
think sometimes having someone on the
Yeah.
outside that is independent, that is non-biased, that you can sit and talk to and kind of vent about those feelings, because it's very hard to let that anger and resentment build up
Mhm.
and damage that relationship. And if I would have done that with my dad, I could have totally destroyed that relationship. And um, having someone independent to talk to, and finding your community,
Mhm.
whatever that may look like, whether it's going to Alana's and Shelby's support group if you're out by where they live, if it's joining a Facebook group, if
Mhm.
it is attending, you're on a local support group like the Endo Center of Chicagoland. Find your community, find your people that understand what
Mhm.
you're going through, and having them to kind of turn to vent, to
Mhm.
process those emotions, I think is key.
It was interesting because we actually had a support group this last weekend, and we had
Okay.
a therapist there, and he said sometimes the best way to process what you've gone through is to do it with others, and the way to feel seen or loved. And it's not always because uh, it doesn't have to be like the physical give a hug. It's
Hmm.
the understanding
Mhm.
and being able to walk through that understanding with someone that understands it,
Hmm.
that is healing.
I think that's huge. I think about my own journey, and that's been so healing, is just encountering, um, from the first Google search and learning about the Endometriosis Research Center and connecting with Heather Godone and Nancy Peterson and
Mhm.
Dr. Sally Sorrell, and many of those amazing endo advocates that we have in our
Mhm.
community. Um, I know I would not be where I am today if it wasn't for them, um,
Right.
because that sense of community is so huge, and being able to vent and get that validation is huge.
Mhm.
Yeah. How do you address the gaslighting and the trauma and the being ignored by our healthcare providers? I think this is something that you can read on Nancy's Nook if you go down and read the comments. It is, I would say, 85 to 95% of the people have
Mhm.
experienced this in some way or another. And so, how do we address this? And I think it's a community wide thing because it is so complex. So, I think part of it is, yeah, we should give a little bit of grace because this is so complex, but also we shouldn't be
Yeah,
ignored for
I
it.
think it's a
Mhm.
complex issue. It's a complex challenge because I think, initially in my personal journey, I really blamed the providers. I was like, they're just not doing their job. They're not doing it well enough. They just don't seem to care. But when I started working in hospitals and sitting next to providers and just having casual conversations and walking with them as they're taking care of their patients in the hospital, I saw a different perspective. Um, our and we're not going to solve the
Mm,
United States healthcare crisis in a podcast. That would be amazing, but um,
no.
yeah, I'd be like, oh,
Yeah,
bow
we'd
down
be
to
really
Alana
good
and
then.
Shelby.
One podcast at a time.
But
I I mean, we could
But I
try,
think
but I don't think
in
we'll get
all
far.
fairness, I think providers are being faced with an extraordinary amount of challenges too, between limitations with health insurance companies, limitations and challenges that are being faced by large medical groups, uh, and being required to have appointments being certain time frames, like 15 minutes, 20 minutes. I mean, have a woman come in with complex endometriosis and other complex medical issues, doing an appointment in 15 minutes, that's like no time. That's, create a relationship, do an exam, review the plan, document.
Mhm.
That
Mhm.
it's really a lot to do in 15 minutes, for example. So giving them some grace, because a lot of them
Mhm.
really do care and they
Mhm.
really want to do better, but they have constraints that are
Right.
out of their control. Um, but I think as patients, what we can do is,
Right.
one, we can check ourselves at the door and make sure that we are in, it is so natural for anybody, but
Mhm.
especially individuals that have gone through trauma, medical trauma, to have our guard up when we walk into a doctor's office or even make that first appointment. Um, it's nerve wracking,
Mhm.
and
Absolutely.
I'm so guilty of that. I joke around with my patients. I
Mhm.
said, just because I work in a hospital doesn't mean that I like to see doctors um, as patients. And I don't, I hate going to the doctor. I'll be honest with
Right.
you, because it is previous experiences of that gaslighting, of that trauma that comes up. And even it may not even be that particular physician that did it. It was just,
Right.
it's just a reaction that I have.
Mhm.
So just kind of keeping yourself in check and using some mindful techniques from when you make that appointment to when you walk into
Right.
that doctor's office, um, and even preparing for that appointment. One of the things that I do is try to keep my what I report off is short and brief and to the point and factual and without added commentary. I also sometimes what I'll do is I'll put the power on the physician. I'm like, okay, this is what I
Right.
feel. This is what I am feeling. Is this normal? Is this to be expected? And what do
Mhm.
you think I should do? What is the best course of action here? Um,
Mhm.
doing that, and I think those are huge.
Yeah. Well, I think too, also making
Mhm.
sure that you do your research on the doctor because I've run into making sure. I mean, I think twofold because having a support group, everyone has different doctors. You can play off of each other. You can say, "Hey, I saw this doctor. They were great. This is what they were good at. This is maybe not what they're the best at." And then there's also the like figuring out even our hormones after hysterectomy and things like that. Which doctor is going to be good? Which PT is going to be good? And the more you talk within your community, the better results you may find
Mhm.
because someone else has already experienced this. And so I think there's that element of putting you at ease, knowing that when you walk in, they've already, in essence, been vetted by other endo patients. Because I know a lot of my fears and a lot of my guard goes up when I don't know how they perceive endometriosis. How do they define it? How do they treat it? How do they any of that? And when you're going in and exploring that as a first time patient of theirs, it can
Mhm.
be very anxiety driven because of all of our
Absolutely.
experiences.
Mhm.
And so I think having that support group is key to finding a
I
good
agree.
provider and helps you
I
honestly
Yeah,
agree.
advocate for yourself better.
because most likely if, someone else has suggested them, then you are, like you said, fully vetted and able to kinda let your
Mhm.
guard down and hear what they have to say. Because I also feel like sometimes we have a filter on of, like, if it's someone new, of trying to figure out if they truly understand how endometriosis works and kind of that process of
Mhm.
the healing journey with it.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that is what's hard too is finding those people that connect in that way.
Mhm.
Even though this disease is 1 in 10, and I think that's a really low
Mhm.
or
Right,
high number,
right.
honestly.
Well, because that's diagnosed
Or
via,
low, yeah,
you know,
it's diagnosed.
surgery,
Mhm,
and so I agree, I believe it's for sure lower because so many women have issues and haven't
mhm.
had surgery yet to verify that.
But it's still, I feel like, hard to put
It
yourself out there
is.
to get support.
Mhm. Yeah.
Which I think leads us to the other thing is the trauma of it and the fear of
Mhm.
the judgment of it,
Absolutely.
you
And
know?
to go back about preparing to go see a practitioner, if you are in a practitioner's office and it's not working, it's not a good fit, and you guys are button heads, you have every right to say,
Mhm,
you know what, doctor, what's your name?
mhm,
This is just not a good fit. I appreciate your time. Thank you. And you have an opportunity to
mhm,
vote with your feet. You know, we are our healthcare system is a consumer society, so you can certainly walk
Mhm.
and find a different provider. And what w- may be great for one
mhm,
person may be an awful fit for you, um, and that's okay.
mhm.
Yep.
Absolutely. To speak to this on a different level, because we do have a lot of listeners from Canada and a lot
Mhm.
of listeners from
The UK.
England and the UK area. I know that this is not as easy to do that because it is a different healthcare system. What are some ways that they can kind of process this and get better help? And especially in like um the mental help that they need, because this
The
takes a toll on us all mentally. And when you're in a system that doesn't recognize
It's
that,
additional
it makes it
trauma
even harder.
that you're experiencing. You feel, I would imagine, not living in Canada or Europe,
Right.
you feel almost boxed in because you feel like you don't have options. So I imagine that
Mhm.
becomes very difficult. And so I think it's important,
Right.
one, just to, um, and I'm not trying to beat a dead horse here, but just making sure that you surround yourself with people that are going to support you in your journey and that are going to be kind of an avenue for support. Like when you have one of those tough
Mhm.
doctor's appointments, um, one
Yep.
of the things I always advocate is for a little bit of self care. Like, for example, I had a doctor's appointment in the city this past
Mhm.
week, and I wasn't looking forward to it. I mean, I was looking forward to some answers and some treatment,
Mhm.
um, as I'm dealing with menopause post
Mhm.
hysterectomy. So trying to figure out how to figure all that out. But it was a very hard appointment because it was very depressing, and I felt like my
Mhm.
options were limited because I have blood clotting issues. Um, so I think that's the closest thing I can think of being boxed
Mm.
in and not having many options. And so taking some time for that self care, process that sadness, process
Mhm.
that um, anger in whatever works for you. And for
Mhm.
me, I love going for walks outside and getting
Yeah.
fresh air, um, and good food. I
Mhm.
won't lie, taking I mean, and it
Can't
doesn't
go
have
wrong
to
with
be
good
like big
food.
fancy things that you do to kind of help process that grief and that trauma. Not, and then it's not even to diminish in the immediate. That's a
Mhm.
great solution, but as this trauma builds up, it's really important that you talk to somebody about it and talk to a professional, whether it's a licensed clinical social worker, whether it is a licensed professional
Right.
counselor, if it's a um, licensed psychologist, and
Yeah.
one that is trained in trauma therapy. And there's a variety of modalities that are used to help process trauma, whether it's
Mhm.
cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness, eye desensitization movement, reprocessing, EDMR, finding a clinician that can help process that with you and
Mhm.
give you a safe place to do that is so key.
I agree. We talked about that this weekend, in fact, of just seeking out help from trusted sources. And again, that goes back to sometimes it's trial and error and how you connect, but how valuable it is. And I also think allowing, and we've talked about this a lot, I'm a big believer in this, but
Mhm.
allowing yourself the space to grieve because we don't often associate that with our emotions towards what's happened to us or to our families or the things that we've missed out on because of this disease or whatever the case may be. We just try to push forward and we try to just get through our everyday, but we don't give ourselves the space to grieve that. And I think that sometimes giving ourselves permission to do certain things like that is the hardest, but the best thing we can do.
Mhm.
And finding someone to affirm that and say, yes, we need to walk through this. Let's retrace this, but also doing it in a healthy manner, I think will help move forward in getting better treatment for
Absolutely. I think
yourself.
if there's someone that, and forgive me, I don't remember the author of this quote, but seen it multiple times. The best um, way that we can help each other is by processing that trauma. And it's those people that have been able to process that trauma and turn around and help others in their journey. And I think in the endometriosis community, I've been very blessed and grateful to
Mhm.
encounter a lot of women and individuals that have worked on processing that trauma and are giving back to the community, and helping to give us a louder voice so that we can create
Mhm.
change, um, and not and it's something as I've gotten more involved in the endo community over the last few years, and realizing that there's probably even grief and trauma that I haven't addressed. When we think of grief, we think of death, we think of losing a loved one. Um, but like you just said, Alana, we don't realize the grief that we're going through
Right.
in this as we cope with this disease, because it is an infinite loss, and it's losses that keep happening. And I think you brought
Mhm.
that up um,
Mhm.
last week on your podcast, and you talked about parenting with children and the ongoing grief that you experience. And I think
Mhm.
as a parent now, um,
Mhm.
Mhm.
of my 7-year old, like there's and then having a hysterectomy, it's like those feelings of grief are creeping up again. And it's just like, wow, even someone who works in this industry and deals with grief all the
Mhm.
time,
Yep.
Mhm.
God has a good way of smacking you in the face with it again, um, reminding you to practice that self-care and deal with.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's what I was just gonna say is you never know when it's gonna hit, you know? It'll come at the most probably inopportune times to
Yeah.
where you're open
Mhm.
to it and it hits hard. And that's what the tricky part is, you think you work through it and then something else comes up and then you're like, "Oh, well, I guess
Mhm.
didn't process that fully," or, and I think some of these things you may not fully process. They may slowly take time to
Mhm.
fully work through, but, it is super tricky how it will pop up.
I feel like even now, I although I've had my hysterectomy and I've processed a lot, and I really was happy to have the hysterectomy, I'm gonna be honest. I didn't care for any of those organs anymore. They didn't serve me well, but at the same time, I was like, "See ya, I'm good." But
Mhm.
then I didn't realize now I'm walking through the hormonal shift. And I've had a lot of hormone issues lately where I feel like the other night I was so depleted and I felt like I was missing out again with my family because I did not have the energy to do what they wanted to do. And I was talking to my husband about it and I said, "I feel like I'm in a state of grief again." Uh, because I went into surgery, had the hysterectomy, had it was felt like I was going to be better surgically.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden I'm dealing with this other thing. And the ladies and I were talking about I I don't know if I coined this, but I said this. It's like the
Mhm.
secondary effects of endo. It's like secondary endo because it's ongoing, and so you're grieving that you may never feel 100% or you're gonna have to in one way or another.
There's something to
There's
always
always yes, there's
work
always
on.
something to work on. There's always something that we can improve, and our
Yeah.
bodies don't always serve us well,
Oh,
Mhm.
and just grieving
that's a
that.
really great way of putting it. I mean, I think
Normalcy.
about that's just wow. Um, that's a really, really great way of putting it. And Alana, my gosh, it's almost like you're talking for me in that your story sounds so identical to me in the sense that I'm in that same spot right now. And it's um, and Shelby, you bring up that there's instances or experiences that you encounter that bring up that grief again, um, and it hits you so hard, and I think that's part of setting expectations and
Mhm.
realizing that maybe we're not going to ever feel 100%. So what can we do to create a path of wellness and whatever that looks like? It may not feel 100%. Um, I
Mhm.
know when I was
Mhm.
told when a hysterectomy was
Right.
initially brought up to me several years ago, they're like, "You're going to feel so much better afterwards," and I do feel physically like I'm not in pain every single day, which is amazing.
Right.
Um, and I love it. I love not being in pain every day, and I know I'm very lucky and I'm
Mhm.
very blessed that I'm able to say that. And I know that there's a lot of women and
Right.
individuals listening to this podcast today that have not experienced that, and that breaks my heart. Um, but still not feeling as well as I
Mhm.
expected,
Mhm.
Mhm.
or having additional issues is frustrating.
Mhm. And I think
Mhm.
that's why we always come back to, finding that support team, whether it's, practitioners of Chinese medicine, chiropractors, acupuncturists, physical
Mhm.
therapists,
Mhm.
friends, to find that support, endocrinologists, to find that team to hopefully make you feel better
Mhm.
and support you along your way. Just because if you don't have a team behind you and you just go through surgery, I feel like it's kind of you hit a wall pretty
Yeah,
quick of needing to find that support again.
Mhm. Well, I also think it's if you tackle one thing and you feel a loss because the other half of this for a lot of us is it's not just bodies that we're struggling
mhm,
to cope with, it's the financial part of it and the stress of that, what it puts on your family, what mentally it does to you because it takes such a toll on all of those things. And I
Mhm.
think that it's once we have the surgery, we save our money, we get through that, we get the help we need there, then, oh, wait, this hormone business and to get proper help, oh, we gotta spend more money on this that we don't necessarily always have. And if you don't have it, what do you do? Like how do you process that? And so what are some healthy ways that you have found for people to kind of regroup and start from the
I
beginning and
think
say, okay,
sitting
one step at
down
a time?
and kind of just looking at what is the most important thing to you right now. What is the most important thing that you want to do? Women, us with endometriosis, we experience a lot of different symptoms, whether it's pelvic pain, infertility, whether it's GI issues, whether it's the fatigue, looking at those symptoms and what is the first one that you want to address and deal with and hit on head on. Um, and it in different times in your journey,
Right.
it may be different things,
Mhm.
um, like when I had my second um,
Mhm.
almost excision surgery for my husband and I, it was the most important thing for us was to have children. Um, And that was our number one goal at that time, and symptom relief.
Mhm.
And,
Mhm.
um, now after having the hysterectomy, it was to be out of pain. I literally, at the end of the day, I was in tears. It hurt so much. So at different times, it can be different
Mhm.
goals. Look at those goals and then surround yourself with
Mhm.
practitioners that are going to help you obtain that goal. Find one strong ally, whether it's your primary care physician, whether it's a really good GYN,
Mhm.
and a person that's going to work with you as a practitioner to help guide you and help obtain that goal, whether it's adequate pain control, whether it is dealing with the fatigue, getting your GI symptoms under control, whether it's, helping appeal the insurance so that you can get access to an out of network care provider. Um, who's going to be your ally there in the medical profession that's going to help you? And it may
Mhm.
mean that it takes time, and you may have to, okay, you meet with this John Doe primary care physician, and he wasn't the right fit, so you go see Jane Doe, and Jane is a different story, and it ends up being a better fit. Finding that ally within your limitations, I think, is huge.
Yeah. I think that's a big part of it too is we've talked about this before about having the physician become part of your advocacy
Mhm.
because it's really hard to advocate just by yourself when you're in the midst of a flare or you're in the midst of trying to figure out your next step or um, dealing with infertility. That's a big one. Knowing where to get the help. And we have talked about this before about your physicians advocating, saying, this isn't
Mhm.
my wheelhouse, but let's talk to someone else who is. And kind of helping you with that next step because I feel like a lot of us, we do get a good physician or maybe we don't
Mhm.
and they're like, well, you got to figure it out.
Mhm.
I can't help you, and that's not the physician for you. It's finding the people and the clinicians that will advocate for you and say, I don't know this, but here's someone that might. And I feel like is so helpful
Right.
because doesn't leave us with a dead end as much. And I feel like this can be,
Mhm.
there's moments of just hopelessness. I've felt that a lot. And so if you have someone
Yeah.
saying, let's look at something
I
else,
think just
you're not stuck
finding a
at that
physician
hopeless
that's
end.
open to
Right.
you sharing information with him or her, just saying like, "Hey, this might be a possibility. What's your thoughts?"
Mhm. I guess what is something that you have seen either in practice or with through Nancy's Nook that we as endo patients need to be aware of mentally? Like, what are some things that are maybe setbacks? And I know this is going to be very, very different for everyone, but by and large, what do you see as a trend or maybe something that continuously happens with endo patients that we can better prepare ourselves mentally for to process?
We need to be aware of how this disease, we talk about endometriosis being affecting a whole body, both affecting our central nervous system and affecting our physical health, but it also affects our mental health. And just acknowledging that. I'm not equating pelvic pain or our symptoms related to endometriosis to our mental, that it's causing, that mental illness is the reason for that. Um, Absolutely. I could not mean that I don't mean that absolutely at
Right.
all. But I think it would be unfair and inappropriate and not fair to us on this journey, that it does impact us, what we've experienced, whether it's gaslighting, dismissal of physicians, dismissal of our loved ones, our
Mhm.
family, our friends, not being able to keep up with our friends when we're in college or even as young adults, to
Mhm.
infertility. That stuff affects us. Being in chronic pain affects us. There is numerous
Mhm.
literature out there in documented in medical journals documenting that individuals with chronic pain are at a higher risk of major depression. that's well documented and well illustrated. What's important is that we need to
Mhm.
acknowledge that and also ground ourselves with mindful techniques as we encounter our medical providers, um, and keep our voices keep raising our voices. I feel like
Right.
that is the one thing that has been so awesome to see about the endometriosis community
Mhm.
over the last 10 years is that our voices are getting louder, and we're talking about it, and we're talking about it with not only our hairdresser, our
Mhm.
classmates, our coworkers, sharing our stories as much as people are doing now through Facebook, through podcasts just like this, through the Endometriosis Summit, through um, I know Worldwide Endo March, et cetera, all different platforms that we have out there. We're talking about it and we're instituting change. It may not
Mhm.
be monumental. We're not seeing monumental change. We're not seeing ACOG's standards change yet. But we are starting to demand change, and our voice is going to continue to get stronger and stronger
Mhm.
as we continue to bind and work together. And we
Mhm.
can make positive change happen. And just, I think of
Yeah.
it like when you throw a pebble into a pond, you see that ripple effect. And we're seeing
Mhm.
that slowly and surely. And um, I think I'm so
Mhm.
proud to be part of the endometriosis community and to see so many great things happening, um, and people coming together all over the place, all over the world, coming together to expand our knowledge and to learn as much as we can. It's so awesome to see and to be part of.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It wasn't like this when I was, 20 years ago when I was first diagnosed. So it's really cool to see. And I may have just aged myself there, but
No.
No,
You
not at
know,
all.
you're much wiser than you once were. It's what I always say. It's funny because you say that we're coming together, and what I'm seeing though is what I think is really cool for me personally is seeing all the partners and the dads and the other family members starting to get it. I think that actually has probably been the most shocking to me in doing a lot of the research for different things is the
hmm
fact that I'm seeing more family members become advocates and saying, "I'm not gonna stop
Mhm.
getting you the help you need." And I've even seen my husband step in and say, "No, you should do this." And it's quiet advocacy in the sense that he's saying, "Okay, you do this podcast, he's giving me that time and really telling me, "No, this is important."
Mhm.
And I think that that wasn't necessarily the case even 10 years ago. So I think we're seeing a big shift even in that element of it of like we're seeing families start to rally. We have a long ways to go in communicating this disease, I think, to the large
Oh,
masses of
Mhm.
people, but I do think
But
we're
people are
getting there.
yeah.
We're
They're
talking about it.
really rising to the top and, screaming it.
I've witnessed the same thing. I mean, my husband's been amazing, and several years ago, during the, I was like, oh, there's this really cool endometriosis summit that I thought I would really like to go, and my husband's like, and I'm like, but I shouldn't go because I shouldn't be away from my family that much, and my husband was like, no, go, go,
Mhm.
go, and so just the ongoing support of the men in our lives and spouses and
Mhm.
significant others, um, seeing their interest and passion and
Mhm.
is huge. I noticed the same things.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too. We're seeing more even celebrities talking about it. The only thing that I will say that I want to caution people in general of is that everyone that's speaking about it is not always the most accurate. And we have to be mindful of that. We have to be mindful of
Mhm.
the information out there because that can be just as traumatizing or just as stress induced or just as much gaslighting in a sense as seeing the wrong physician or whatever it may be. Because there's a lot of people out there pushing products that don't necessarily really help endometriosis at all and isn't, in fact, scientifically proven or any other source of proven. You know, it's like there's just not, I think that we have to be careful of that because it can be harmful.
Absolutely. When you look at any type of potential intervention or treatment, make sure you're looking at the research, making sure you're looking at who's promoting this, what
Right.
company is promoting this, what pharmaceutical company is promoting it.
Mhm.
I'm a huge proponent and a huge advocate of educating yourself as much as possible and doing what's best for you. As long as you know the risks and the potential benefits for a
Mhm.
particular intervention and you understand that, commonly known as informed choice, then and you are making an informed choice, then go
Mhm.
for it. But there is so much inadequate, inaccurate information out there. So look at
Mhm.
the source where that information is coming from, because that will often, um, depending on who the source is, it could provide some very slanted information, one
Mhm.
sided.
Yeah, and I do think that
Where's the money?
right. Where's the money? But and then I also think going back to the doctors, they're just as misinformed as
Mhm.
a lot of the public is. And so just recognizing that and
Hmm.
taking that information and if they're willing to hear it and really soak it in, I think that's a good sign of a doctor. A lot of them, unfortunately, at this point, to my experience, has not been that way. I have a few that are, but in general, OBGYN, because they're taught one way, it's very hard to break that cycle. And so I think it's just as important to advocate in that arena too of saying, have you looked into this website and just hand them over Nancy's Nook website and
Mhm.
like just slide it across the table so slightly like because then they're not defensive,
Yeah,
right? Like you can't go in and
right.
and put their defenses up. If you really wanna see change, if you really wanna get help, sometimes it just takes approaching, "Hey, have you read about this, or have you seen this study?" And print
Mhm.
off this study, or, "I'm gonna send you this study, and I would love to get your feedback on that." And that'll be a good gauge as to where they're at too and how they're gonna help you. At least that's how I have felt in my experience with that,
Hmm.
and I think we're getting there, but we're not there yet for that.
No, I think those are really good suggestions. I know Nancy has also suggested, when you get your operative reports and your pictures from your excision laparoscopy, you can share that with your previous provider,
Mhm.
um, and just say, "Hey, look, I went to XYZ physician, and this is what he or she discovered, and I just wanted to share that with you." And I know it's brought up some really good conversations with my local doctors,
Mhm.
um, and I'm grateful for that. And I think just presenting it in a very relaxed, non-threatening way
Mhm.
is
Mhm.
so important.
I also think that's healing
Mhm.
to confront it. I don't know if this is clinical or not, but I'm gonna say that's probably pretty healing in some ways,
Well, it's
like
just validating,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
kindly sharing with them, like, hey, this is what I went through, and this
Mhm.
is what endometriosis can look like, even though my symptoms aren't textbook per se, or
Right.
depending on what your story and your symptoms
Mhm.
are, like it kind of is kindly validating and sharing with them, like, hey, look, like you might want to think, if further patients have these issues of X, Y, and
Mhm.
Z, like this was the doctor I saw. He or she would be a great resource,
Yeah.
for you to send other patients to if it's past your scope, or,
Yeah.
just really validating
Mhm.
your story.
Yeah.
I think it is very healing to do that. We going back to, how we walk through that trauma, and one of the ways to give back is sharing your experience. And by doing that, I think you may not see an immediate response, positive response. You may not see immediate change, but you're planting a seed with that
Mhm.
doctor,
Yep.
and encouraging him or her to, like, challenging their way of thinking. And I think
Mhm.
that's a good way to initiate that ripple effect,
Mhm.
and ways that we might be able to change the bigger picture,
Yeah.
and change the way that gynecologists practice today, you know.
Mhm.
So I think that's a really great way that we as individuals can institute change. I think when I think about like how much I want to change in the endometriosis world and to make care better for our fellow individuals that are experiencing endometriosis, it's overwhelming and it's discouraging. It's like, oh, we're never going to get
Mhm.
there. We're never going to be able to accomplish that. But that's just one little example of how we can make positive change. You know, um, giving a physician information about Nancy's Nook website, giving them information about the Endometriosis Research Center.
Yeah.
Um, I know with my pelvic floor physical therapist, I gave her information about the Endometriosis Summit. I'm like, here are some great opportunities to learn more about the
Mhm.
endometriosis community and multidisciplinary care.
Yeah.
And you get CEUs, you know.
Right.
Yep. It's a
So I
win-win
think
for
that
other
was,
practitioners.
yeah. So I think those are all little ways that we can begin bring about change.
Mhm.
I feel like it kind of like gives you your power back for all those years that
That
you felt
too.
powerless. Like, see, now I don't want to tell
Yeah.
you I said so, but I said so,
Yep.
like, or, I just think there's like an
It's like a
element of
hidden
it
way of
that's,
saying it.
yeah,
Right.
exactly. Like, you don't want to be the petty person, but you want to be the petty person. Like,
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
but
Oh, yeah. Been there, wanna do that.
yeah.
Yep.
But I think it is validating, and I think it gives you some of your power back to know that you were able to educate another person about it, and someone that is in a lot of ways more highly educated than we are about a lot of things, just not everything. And so I think that it's empowering to do that, and it's empowering, and it's allowing us to walk through a process, finish a process. I think there's a lot of healing done in finishing a process
Mhm.
and completing something. I mean,
Mhm.
I'm a list person, and when you complete that list, it is like I have a red pen for everything that I complete on my like honey-do list, and I cross it out, and it's so freeing, and I love it. But I feel like there's that element of it still when we're advocating, when we're talking
Yep.
to our doctors. Finish it and then move on.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yep. Yeah, it ties up all loose ends of really, circling back and coming back to, again, I feel like it's all about validating. You've been gaslit for so many years that finally, once you
Mhm.
get the validation, you kind of want to go back to those people who didn't validate you and kindly show them, like, hey, just so you know, this is what my symptoms looked like.
Mhm.
And it was endometriosis. So,
And I would say that's easier to do here in the States than probably other places where you can't
oh, for
just
sure.
s- drop in on your doctor and give them this because it's a different system.
Yep.
So I do recognize that this is not going to be for
Yeah.
everyone,
No.
but I do think there's value
No.
in being open and honest about
Mhm.
that. And there's freedom in that part of your journey if
Mhm.
you can speak out to that.
Yep.
Whether it's social media, whatever the case may be, talking to your family, I think there's freedom and healing in that process. So,
Absolutely.
well, thank you, Kara, for your time and for everything that you do for
Mhm.
all of us that have come to the Nook, and you've poured all your time, energy, blood, sweat, tears into that, as well as advocating and being a support system for all those other people around you. And then what you do in the hospital system, because your place in that system is
Mhm.
invaluable. Like, you bring so much to the table with that. So thank you. Thank you for joining us here today. Thank you for speaking into the mental health arena that we need to address even more.
Mhm.
And we just value that. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for providing this opportunity and both of you putting together this podcast and reminding all of us the importance of taking care of ourselves and refilling our battery, and different ways that we can do that.
Thank you. That means a
Yes.
lot to us. So
Thank you
thank
so
you.
much.